Hello, my internet friends. Welcome back to Walking and Talking, the show where I walk and talk. I'm just kind of investigating in here what my immediate experience is and trying to narrate it. Physically, it's not an unpleasant experience. My body feels some physical tiredness from exercising, but it feels like tired in a good way, in a slightly refreshing way. And because the weather is warm and pleasant, it contributes to a feeling of relaxation. But then I wonder, beneath all that, is there something a little more pertinent about this experience, something more fundamental about this experience that's going on? Than descriptors like that, like and maybe really more importantly is not to talk about ideas like that, about external things going on. Well, I think these are elm samaras, they call them, these seed things. You can put them in salad. They're not bad. So here I am, immediately engaging with, the exterior world. When my goal, theoretically, is to direct my attention inward, until the inward and the outward merge into each other, and the distinction becomes clearly false. So I guess maybe I shouldn't worry about it. Bluebells. But when I talk about something like the elm samaras, and I feel when I think about myself talking about stuff like that, I feel a little tinge of embarrassment. As if I've revealed some small aspect of my personality or identity. Because my goal is more to transcend personality and identity. In this case. But even when I say that, I feel also a tinge of embarrassment. Because that goal itself could be considered an aspect of my identity and personality. And also evidence of a dualistic understanding of things. Whereas someone who never even, thinks about such things just doesn't have the problem. I was gonna say that, maybe somebody who never thinks about trying to transcend identity, maybe by never thinking about it, they in some way exist in a non-dual awareness, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure actually about that. It's certainly true that the non-duality of reality pervades their personality and everything about everyone and everything, but does everyone realize that to some extent? I tend to have this feeling like that kind of truth is in some sense readily available to anyone, to everyone, whereas if everyone knows it already in some way. I'm not sure. As if for anyone to realize it's more like remembering it. Like remembering something that you always knew. Remembering a kind of awareness that's always been there. But I still seem to be talking about abstract ideas, and I'm continuing to feel embarrassment. Maybe even more intensely now, maybe intense embarrassment about the quality of what I'm saying, both the content of it and the delivery of it, because they seem unfocused, unclear, not fully formed ideas. I'm aware of this time passing. You know, the time, my life is passing me by, and so is yours right now. So is this time that's spent in a worthwhile manner? Is it worth spending time this way? You know, I guess it's interesting that we had the opportunity to even question that, because a lot of the ways that we spend our time, we don't stop and question whether it's worthwhile. We just do it, and that seems fine. When the question isn't there, you're not worried about it. And so in that sense, you're not suffering in that way. So now I do this, walking and talking, this activity where continually I really question the value of it. And I experience emotionally some emotional pain a lot of the time, not all of the time. Maybe not even most of the time. But usually in the first part of walking and talking, the beginning of it, and going into it for, you know, maybe an hour and a half, sometimes even 2 hours, sometimes even 3 hours. I experienced some difficulty, meaning like unpleasant emotions and kind of some extent of painful reflection, self-reflection. And sometimes maybe some part of myself is to some extent reframing that pain and difficulty as productive pain and difficulty. Sometimes in the moment of experiencing it, that's not really possible. And if it is possible to reframe it positively, and then that ends up alleviating that pain and suffering, is it still a productive pain and suffering? I don't know. We don't necessarily need to equate pain and difficulty with productivity. They don't necessarily need to correlate. And it's not necessarily true that, or at least it's not self-evident to me, that you can't be productive without suffering and that suffering itself isn't necessarily productive. But I do have to acknowledge a very strong pattern that I always see repeated in walking and talking, wherein the difficulty experienced towards the beginning part, no matter how profound it is and how deep and real it is, does retroactively become meaningful and productive work, usually in the latter part of the episode. And it's almost like, to the extent that I suffer in the beginning, then I experience the opposite of that suffering, and I feel certain fulfillment and positivity. And I tend to feel the opposite of the feelings experienced in the first part and the second part. Both like opposite in terms of the nature of the negative feelings and thoughts, but similar in intensity, so that over the course of the 4 hours, my emotional topography tends to even out to zero. It seems like that's not always true, actually. Sometimes it might seem a little more negative or a little more positive on average, but often it seems to average out to something approximating neutrality. And along with that emotional topography, I can observe the change in the nature of my mental interpretation of anything. How I mentally interpret my experience, and how I mentally relate to concepts of myself and my life. Will change drastically within an episode of walking and talking. And that serves to kind of illuminate just the mind's continuing role in creating a conception of the self. And just how changing and like transitory that conception of the self is. And when I put myself in a framework like this, it's a long enough period of time with my activity limited to a narrow enough range, and creating a certain commitment to having some awareness of my thoughts, and emotions, which is helped by the fact that they are recorded and made public. The fact that everything that I say is going to become public places some kind of impetus on me. Well, it just naturally gives me some more like awareness or consciousness of my thoughts. And so that is an aid to me to remain, in this activity of like mental reflexivity. For the allotted time period. And then for myself, I have some kind of, I guess I was gonna say commitment towards honesty about my thoughts, but I'm not sure what that means exactly, because for me to be dishonest about my thoughts, I'd have to have some time to be able to contrive the lie about what I'm thinking, so that I can express one thing while actually thinking the other. And to try and do that continuously for 4 hours is like, would be very difficult. And I also don't have any reason for that. But then there's also the problem of honesty, where it's like, how honest am I actually being with myself? I'm not always sure, because most of the time, as soon as I say something, I'm able to recognize either some fallacy in it or some partiality to its truth. And recognize motivations behind it that could be self-aggrandizing, or not only just self-aggrandizing, but even in a subtler way, seeing the impetus behind my thoughts as being part of maintaining an identity, a concept of identity that's more or less solid and also is based upon my conception of society, and based upon, to some extent, what I would, my imagined expectations of society, and you know, there's an interest here in upholding an image of myself that society might approve of, or that at least satisfies certain moral rules, moral guidelines, or exemplify some form of social morality. But so that's like, you know, a characteristic of particular content of my thoughts of within Walking and Talking. Characteristics of a lot of the thoughts, the things that I say. Those are characteristics that I notice, the thing that's noticing, you know, my like proximate self, the self that I am identified with right now, the self that I would say is the I that's perceiving something, it keeps noticing characteristics of the things that I say and the things that I think, and disidentifying with them as it notices them. And so I'm just saying, like, one of the common characteristics that I am noticing of my thoughts is they're tending to kind of to present as like as morally good in my imagined eyes of society. But as the process goes along and I disidentify more with that, you know, and I notice that, and then I feel that tinge of embarrassment, that embarrassment of noticing these kind of subconscious motivations of fitting into social norms and widely accepted notions of morality. As it goes on, I disidentify more and more with that. I think that what starts to become more predominant is maybe a morality that is more like inherent to me as an individual, if that's such a thing, like a more self-created notion of morality that's a little more that's more independent from the norms of society, but at the same time is still a morality. If you know, just if it is a morality, then it's inherently related to society at large. It's in relation to other people in the world, how to live with other people in the world. Here's a chair. I can't see what's broken about it yet. It's pretty plastic. That is, I start to relate to the external, like, social world from a more independently created morality than a morality that's a little bit more dictated by society itself. And then when I think what happens, I'm not sure if I'm actively engaging in this yet. I might just be remembering. I think what happens next is that as I start to investigate that independently moral way of relating to the world, I start to disidentify with that, and maybe start to disidentify with morality altogether. Or maybe what happens is that realm of the moral, that is that realm of relating to others in the world, starts to merge with the realm of the aesthetic, that is like my more immediate subjective experience. As well as the realm of the more scientific, objective experience of reality. Like those all start to merge a bit. And so it's not really a question of morality or of of like personal integrity. Like I'm in a very clear mode of thinking, but I'm getting there, I think. I'm starting to become a little bit more coherent, and my thoughts are starting to have a little bit more connection. I have been talking pretty slowly so far, so now I feel myself putting in a little bit of effort to pick up the pace a little bit, so that I'm not a total, bore. But, it's the question of I still want to be as actively engaged with each thing that I say as possible, rather than spouting off a thought that's been more or less pre-formulated in my mind. But to some extent, all the thoughts that I say must kind of exist in some form in my mind already, but that might not necessarily be true, because I seem to experience in walking, talking, particularly as I get towards the latter part of the video, I seem to experience thoughts come to me that I didn't, that seem fresh, that I'm not, that I wasn't familiar with before. Like something, as if something actually got generated, but it must just be some kind of synthesis of stuff that already existed in my brain, right? When we're thinking verbally, do all the thoughts originate in outside thoughts that we obtained verbally? I don't think completely. You know, it's entirely possible that the sensory information that I take in can interact with my verbal way of thinking in a way to generate novel verbal thoughts, I suppose. Still continuing to feel embarrassment about myself, and I'm not even sure why I feel the need to keep disclosing that feeling of embarrassment, except as maybe some form of defense. Like, if I say that I'm embarrassed for myself before you start to feel embarrassed for me, maybe I can prevent some of that embarrassment, or I can prevent the really truly embarrassing reality of having other people feel embarrassed for me. And so I guess I keep trying to preemptively say the things that I think you might think, so I can feel as if I have some kind of upper hand, so that I can earn or maintain some modicum of respect from you, or something like that. But maybe that itself is a symptom of insecurity, of judging myself through the imagined eyes of you, and maybe that behavior in itself might be alienating to you and could come across as kind of cold. As if, you know, once I'm actually able to cast off that self-consciousness, and by self-consciousness I mean constantly looking at myself through the imagined eyes of others, then I'll simultaneously cast off inhibitions to my way of being. And once I cast off those inhibitions, I can relate to you in a more true and warm and lighthearted way. But let's be honest here. There's always a little bit of crust to cut through before you get there. And if there wasn't that, then what would be the point? There's some kind of barrier to break through between you and I. I guess it's that barrier that also grants some meaning to the potential connection. There's turtles. I'm happy to report it's turtle season again. And it's a sunny day, so we're doubtlessly going to be seeing a lot of turtles. Something just jumped out of that water, or into that water. In some ways though, I almost feel like this YouTube relationship between us is like in some ways better than IRL friendship or friendship in general. This might be better than friendship. Whoa. Whoa, big ass snapping turtle. Look at that monster. Holy shit. Holy shit. Look at that snapper. That's like a dinosaur. Whoa. Holy shit. Do you empathize with my enjoyment of this turtle? Sometimes when I don't care about stuff, which is very often, I can really appreciate being around somebody who like is really opinionated and feels like very positively and negatively about certain things. And so I can just like enjoy I can enjoy empathizing with their like their attraction or revulsion towards certain things that I just feel ambivalent about. So if you feel ambivalent about turtles, which seems crazy to me, maybe you can enjoy, maybe you can appreciate experiencing my enjoyment of turtles. Although like even in the enjoyment of turtles, there's embedded in that like some form of sadness or something like that, of like I can never fully possess the turtle. Like I can never fully like merge with the turtle that is like the object of my kind of affection or something. It'll always be a little bit other than I. Even if I caught the turtle and had it as a pet. Even if I had the turtle as a pet and I like took it out and played with it every day, I would never like, there would always be a certain distance that I could never traverse. I could never fully be the turtle. and it would never fully understand me either. I could never fully, I could never fully understand a turtle, and it could never fully understand me. There's a little tiny baby one swimming. I don't know if you can see that. It's so tiny. It's so tiny. Any animal that is smaller than the normal version of that animal immediately earns our adoration. And that is like true in all cases. The larger an animal is, the less we like it. Whoa, there's a ton of turtles right here. See those ones? We don't like these turtles as much as we like the baby one. The smaller, the larger, the smaller the turtle is, the more we like it. Just like with people, the younger the person is, the more we like them. Maybe that's not universally true, but like with our in the manner of like our in the manner of like a emotional clinging, grasping attraction type of thing, the younger the person is. Like a baby, we adore babies, and then like I think like Patty or Selma from The Simpsons once said, the old kids, the older they get, the cuter they ain't. Now the embarrassment that I feel. Hey, there's a dinosaur. Hey, this is my favorite dinosaur, an Ankylosaurus. I can't believe there's an Ankylosaurus right here. My embarrassment now is on kind of the wandering nature of my thoughts. I can't find a strong continuity in what I'm talking about. And I'm having this feeling of maybe I'm lacking a certain kind of commitment, lacking focus, lacking some kind of discipline, of limiting my thoughts more towards, totally like immaterial, deeper observations of this experience. But there's still time. And maybe the commitment is still here, regardless of what exactly I'm talking about. Or maybe I'll retroactively interpret how what I'm saying now is consistent with a unified vision. That seems possible. How many times in our life are we in total despair and agonizing self-criticism and feel like a total failure? And then at some time in the future, we feel a little better about ourselves, and we find a way to integrate that past experience into a positive concept, or at least like functional conception of ourselves. And that seems to often happen in walking and talking. And like, even to the extent that I insist to myself that the feelings of failure are real, and that the failures are real, and that even to the extent that I view myself as a very real failure, at some later point, even that very experience, I will view as inordinate, as like, valuable, and just like an integrated and valuable aspect of my being, and that has meaning in relationship to the rest of the world as well. Like having as full an experience of failure as possible, and then you have the opposite feeling fully as well. Whether it has any, whether that correlates objectively to the external world, and whether the external world sees you as a failure or a success, is another question. But it's almost it's kind of unimportant. It's only important it's important to the extent that it determines your own experience of yourself. It's important to the extent that you grant it importance, and I'm not saying that granting it importance is a falsehood. We don't have to have this, this idea that our meaning in life is 100% determined by us and not the outside world. I think depends on upholding this dichotomy between the internal and external world. like you can recognize external validation as, I don't know, as not separate from your own internal validation, if you want, and then you can strive for external validation, and it will, and then maybe it'll correlate with the internal experience of success. Maybe. I feel like there's something I could be talking about this more clearly. Like there's a more lucid explanation of what I seem to be getting at. I think it's that as your own sphere of identification grows, which is what it tends to do, then then what constitutes a success or a failure will grow correspondingly. But so for example, you could be kind of identified with society in the manner where you derive your meaning and direction in life from society's values, and in that case your failures or successes will be, what constitutes a failure or success will be completely determined by society's validation of you, or not, or lack thereof. But then if you are operating on a more independently created morality, which is still relating to society, what constitutes a success or failure for you would be more like it would be more like how effective you are at communicating or enacting, either enacting or communicating your particular, internal moral program on society, regardless of whether society it validates it or not. Because, like, for me, what it is that my own personal conception of morality very rarely correlates with right and wrong, or that what does correlate with right and wrong for me personally comes up in these relative and fairly clear-cut questions that aren't really that big of questions. Because if it's to the extent that it's clearly right or wrong, then you just do what's right. And then where the real meat of morality is, for me, where the real moral questions are on that horizon where things are really unclear. And to try and move towards that reality, move towards that horizon and bring that horizon closer to reality, doesn't necessarily correlate to saying that something's right or wrong. There's a horizon of value. There are forms of value on the horizon and beyond the horizon that we don't recognize yet. And I feel myself striving towards that horizon. Or another way to put it about as your sphere of what you identify with, the scope of what you identify with grows. For instance, growth from being purely recognizing your own body as an infant, to gaining some kind of awareness of other people around you and your family and friends, to then identifying with the larger group identity, like maybe it's your country or something like that, and then you start to then growing more and identifying with all of the people in the world, and then all of the people and all of the beings in the world, and then maybe you're expanding towards identifying also with inanimate matter. As that happens, your conception of morality is going to have to keep expanding. And what seems moral to you may not seem moral to somebody who is operating at a different level of identification. Still working here. Still working to feel as if I'm thinking in some kind of way that's contributing anything. And I've kind of expressed various thoughts in ways that in my eyes don't seem super clearly articulated, nor very organized in a larger scheme of things. And that distresses me a little bit. As in, an hour and 8 minutes have gone by, and so I think to myself, how am I going to retroactively make any sense of this? How's that going to happen? I don't know. It seems as if we've spent an hour and 8 minutes together, and nothing that great has happened. I feel a little bit physically and mentally tired, or just kind of a little bit slow or something. But I don't know if that's important to point out. Maybe I just need to deal with that and stop comparing this state with other states. Keep feeling really thirsty, and I feel disappointed in myself for, I guess, maybe even engaging in this thought. Where I'm just kind of addressing my physical state. That is my expressed tiredness and thirst. As opposed to clearly and in a flowing, engaging manner. Generating novel and valuable thoughts. And I'm noticing that I've kind of oscillated here in between talking about somewhat ideas that are somewhat abstracted from my immediate experience, and then talking about my immediate experience. I've kind of shifted back and forth. Without feeling a great degree of continuity between them, and I've felt some amount of distraction by things in my environment, and I continue to feel such distraction, and an increasing sense of disappointment in what I'm doing, and I feel very unsure whether expressing that, or even, allowing myself to go down that train of thought of self-criticality, wondering if that itself is problematic, or if it's just like reifying this problem and taking up energy that would be more usefully directed in an unself-conscious manner. And then on the other hand, I wonder if this is more honest to just reveal this self-doubt, and sometimes I wonder if by just really allowing the self-doubt, allowing myself to experience the self-doubt fully, is some way to metabolize it and at least temporarily expunge it. Because it always seems to be the case that I come out the other side, always, from the self-doubt, and then get into, some mode of thinking where it's like doubt the self until the self kind of like disappears for a while, and then I'm able to operate really without either self-doubt or self-aggrandizement, really without much conception of self at all, but still able to continue thinking. but without this like referent of self. And I think also that I am being influenced by my physiological state. Being somewhat physiologically exhausted, owing to recent activities, I think that has a large effect on my emotional state, and then of course my emotional state has a large effect on the nature of my thoughts. But I recognize that to remedy this physiological state really just takes time. Just takes some waiting for my body to recover. I'm not like lacking food or anything like that. I just have to wait for my body to recover, as well as my neurotransmitters. And as long as I do that in a way that's not strongly reacting to my physiological state, like heavily seeking out other stimuli in order to immediately self alter my physiological state. For instance, if I were to imbibe a lot of caffeine or something like that, or sugar or something like that, in order to immediately escape the experience of tiredness and slowness. It would in an immediate sense maybe affect my neurotransmitters in some way, but in a less stable way, I would say, than if I just kind of wait and allow my body to recalibrate naturally. I think that will in the future provide a much more steady feeling of energy, a much more steady energy level, which should be, whoa, look at all those turtles on that bank, holy shit. Somehow they remind me of soldiers. Maybe it's because of their shell. So it could be the case that this walking and talking episode in some way has to sacrifice immediate energy and engagement and, you know, like high level thinking or something in the service of longer term the longer term stability of all of those things. What's that bird looking for? And it's not only just you know, just like physiological stimulation that it's kind of important to avoid at this point. But also just other like sensorial stimulation, informational stimulation. Like I feel that it's important to recalibrate my mind as well. To be able to experience, you know, more like autonomous state of activation without a constant input of stimulation, sensory stimulation or informational stimulation. And walking and talking is one of the best ways to do that. Oh my God, look at this tiny turtle. So much for no sensory stimulation, huh? I don't want you to get run over here in the path. And so I get the pleasure of holding you for a moment, whoop, and then putting you over here. Well, so much for absence of sensory stimulation. But you know, that doesn't seem like the unhealthy sort of stimulation. A baby turtle. Wow, you can't really swing a dead cat without hitting a turtle around here. Whoa. But this, I do think that that walking talking is an excellent way to recalibrate physically and mentally because it's relatively free of any of the like stimulating input that I have a tendency to grasp towards in an emotional way. Like there's no gratifying food around. There is lots of food around, like this garlic mustard, but it's just greens. It has a pungent flavor, but it's not a type of gratifying physiological sense like eating something that's a lot of carbohydrates or fat or salt is. It's almost like it almost even helps in this process. Because it like it kind of like keys me into sensorial experience in a non-grasping way. Like that is a sensory input, eating garlic mustard, and I taste the pungency of it, but it's certainly not any kind of like it's not exactly like a type of acute pleasure that would be addictive. It's like if I'm gonna eat a garlic mustard leaf, then I'm always gonna be making the decision with more parts of my consciousness aligned than necessarily are so when I'm eating something like chocolate. Here's some kind of larva floating in the air. And as well as not having mental input in the form of thoughts coming in, no information, there's no like verbal information coming in. In the place where I'm in, there's not like really any symbolic information coming in. In addition to that, the publicness of my thought, in which I referenced earlier, puts some kind of constraint on my thinking, some kind of impetus to keep put some kind of effort in my thinking to going hopefully in some kind of useful direction, hopefully keeping it in some realm where it's I don't know, has some kind of self-awareness that keeps it from like going into some kind of pattern of inventing stories or going off on some train of abstraction that's like far from reality or something like that. It keeps me in some way from indulging too much in the types of thoughts that might tend to strengthen it, or that might tend to like constrict my identity. You know, it prevents me from going off on narratives about my identity that would actually kind of limit my identity. And so I feel grateful for that. So if in this episode of Walking and Talking we have to maybe sacrifice some of the quality of stimulation in the thought, in our way of thinking, I think that's perfectly okay. And for me, this might be a somewhat new way of valuing. I mean, this might be an experience that I'm newly finding value in, or at least newly expressing the value of in walking and talking. And that I haven't before really framed this experience as this kind of like sacrificial recalibration. And so in that sense, I'm maybe beginning to discover at least a hint of what might be the route of redemption of this episode. A hint of what form the reintegration of my previous experience of self-doubt and failure might look like. You know what I'm saying? Like in the for much of this video, having expressed some feelings of failure and self-doubt about how I was thinking, how I was talking, how I was feeling. And then, having some knowledge of this phenomenon that always seems to happen, whereas what I think is horrible in the first part, like, becomes meaningful later. But back then, I couldn't understand, I couldn't see how it would become meaningful, Because, like, in the moment, sometimes it feels like just like purely time wasted or something, purely a bad experience, something that I could be better off without. And I'm sure you've had experiences like this in your life too, where you have an experience that in the time of having that experience, you can only perceive it as horrible and that you would be better off without it. And you can't see from that perspective how it could ever be meaningful in your life. But then time passes, and then you kind of realize that it's some integral part of you that gives you a certain positive quality, or just like, grants some kind of meaning to your life. Maybe it's meaningful narrative, or maybe it's just positive characteristics of yourself, or character in general. And then you are no longer experiencing the horribleness of that experience, but you find yourself experiencing the meaningfulness of the present experience. And just now, while I'm standing on this bridge, I start to have hints of that, and then I start to notice in my experience feelings of a more positive nature, and noticing the quality of my thought and speaking and regarding them a little bit more positively, or just anew, feeling anew, like here's something coming up from my thought that's completely connected to all the negative thoughts that I had before and the thoughts that I considered worthless. Like these thoughts that I'm having now, and this emotional state that I'm having now, which is I would say better than only a few minutes ago, and more pleasant than only a few minutes ago. Like, I'm not experiencing this embarrassment so much at the moment, but this experience right now is completely dependent on that previous experience of feeling embarrassed and feeling like a failure, and having this experience of like not being able to think clearly, feeling slow. And so this can be in some ways you can use it as a consolation, but it's not really necessary to use anything as a consolation. But you can obviously extrapolate this to other life circumstances. And so if you any form of difficulty that you're experiencing, go ahead and experience it fully. And don't like react immediately and try not to experience, and like try to not experience difficulty. But even saying that doesn't matter, because even if you try not to experience difficulty, you will experience difficulty just in some other form of trying to avoid difficulty. It's unavoidable. And even with the unavoidable, difficult feelings, you will eventually experience the opposite of those feelings, of those experiences. I mean, that's not to say that, like, for some reason, if you have like some debilitating disease or problem with your body, it's not to say that like it's going to like reverse itself physically. But I would say that it is likely that the mental and emotional distress associated with it would reverse itself. And I think, like, they say some study about people's happiness. I'm not sure if it's self-reported happiness or if they measure it in some other way, of people who either A, win the lottery, or B, become a paraplegic. It's like their happiness is affected for like a year or something like that, but then like after as short a time as like a year or maybe a few years or something, their levels of happiness are pretty much equal to each other again. And that's like, with that realization, it's like I don't worry too much about feeling bad. I mean, but that's not entirely true, because like feeling bad is inherently, by definition, something that you don't want. And so, of course, in the state of feeling bad, I want nothing else than to stop feeling bad. But it's like, depending on what level of consciousness I am feeling bad, like if it's a feeling bad that I'm totally identified with, then of course, then I'm also identified with the feeling of wanting to stop feeling bad and wanting to get out of it. But to the extent that there is a I awareness that is even slightly disidentified with this bad feeling, then that I awareness can like observe this like feeling bad and like know that that's temporary, and that I'll at some point the opposite of that will manifest. So that's why this like process of disidentification with one like level of consciousness is very important, and then identifying with a broader, larger scope of awareness. Is really helpful. It helps. It allows you to direct your life towards goals of a broader scope, or kind of deeper level of impact, because you can direct yourself through more superficial levels of being, and you can mediate your impulses, regulate your impulses, you know. Like for like an infant or a very young child, like the idea of like exercising doesn't work, you know. It's like, why would a baby like want to like lift weights? Because they are, the top level of their identification is with this like sensation and emotion, and doing something like exercise is like is, you know, in that immediate sensation emotion realm is an unpleasant experience, you know. You lift some weights until your muscles hurt, and, you know, very young children, it's like there's not this like there's not yet this like mental consciousness that can look down upon the physical being and control the physical existence from a mental perspective that can project into the future the positive effects of exercise. It takes, you know, it takes then a level of development where you disidentify with only your body, and then you become identified with your mind. So then your mind starts to take more control of your body, and so like, and that's why once you are identified with this mental state, then you can use your mind then your mind can come up with goals, because it's your mind that can, you know, perceive time and project into the future and come up with goals. And then it can make your body do things that are in the immediate sense unpleasant to the body, but you know, not suffering on the mental level. And then, but that, you know, that process extends upward, and you can gain a level of awareness that's like above the mind, and you can look down and observe your mind without being identified with it. And then you can operate in a way that would previously like be unpleasant to the mind, and maybe it is still in the immediate sense unpleasant to the mind, like where you like maybe I'll do something that in which in the immediate sense I experience mental distress. For example, much of the time spent in walking and talking, where I feel I experience a host of unpleasant thoughts, negative conceptions of myself and what I'm doing. but then like during that process, like a disidentification from my mind takes place, or is revealed. And then like at some point what's revealed is like the actual usefulness, you could say, and benefit of going through that process of experiencing this like mental distress, which is like starting to become evident, I feel like, right now. Like like the mental distress is kind of has in large part gone away already, and so has any like emotional distress, or you know. So it's like a similar process of the mind making the body exercise. That is, the mind makes the body do something that's immediately uncomfortable, with the goal of it feeling more comfortable, and like, you know, overall much better in the long term. Like the body will feel some immediate discomfort in the exercise, but then overall it feels like a lot better than if it didn't do the uncomfortable exercise. And that is thanks to the mind. And then so once there's a level of awareness that's kind of higher than just the mind starting to come into play, it can force the mind to do uncomfortable things. Things that are uncomfortable in the immediate sense to actually feel a lot better in the long run. Kind of like, it's just like exercise for the mind. That there is some kind of deeper awareness compelling it to do. And sometimes I wonder about, you know, depending on the level of awareness and identification and the strength and continuity of that identification, like how far is it possible to go in disciplining like the body and the mind or maybe even higher realms of existence, like your soul, like your, you know, even your own like subjectivity or something like that. Like how far and how deep can we go in compelling ourselves to do things that are immediately uncomfortable in the service of a longer term, greater scope, greater depth well-being, and peace. As for example, like on the level of the body, like there might be things that immediately ameliorate discomfort on the bodily level, but that over a long term contribute to more discomfort on the bodily level. And then similarly on the mental level, there's things that would immediately ameliorate unpleasant thoughts, but would over the long term contribute more to them. Like maybe I could say things like drugs, or like indulgent types of media, or really overstimulating types of media. But like, you know, going without all of those things, like going without you know, any type of pleasure, you know, for a long time, whether physical or mental or emotional, it's about like the ability to do that rests upon the ability to identify with a higher level of awareness, like to be aware above that, to be you know, observing the body and the mind, so that, you know, your deepest subjectivity, your deepest identification, your deepest level of identification is able to be disidentified enough with the body and mind to, you know, be able to really discipline it over a long period, or for a lot of intensity, with a lot of intensity. And so then there's the question of like, can you do that even on a higher level of like what we could call our soul, or that more inner like subjectivity that is able to look upon the mind? Like, could one actually like deprive the soul of sustenance? Which would be like, you know, which would be like kind of like spiritually crushing in the immediate sense. But in a longer term and greater scope and deeper way, lead towards just more happiness, or to use something more, a better term than happiness, like more peace, like a stronger and healthier soul. And so if I think about that, and it seems true, and to ignore that would feel like some degree of bad faith. And like if somebody kind of like to me, if somebody like personally like kind of like tells me in a somewhat shallow way to like cheer up, or you know, that I should just do something pleasurable, then I have to maintain my skepticism of that, and like kind of stay true to a deeper truth and a deeper, you know, a deeper program that knows in an immediate sense, like to just engage in more superficial expressions of happiness, and you know, doesn't mean just like faking a superficial expression of happiness, but to kind of indulge in allowing myself to become identified with a superficial experience of pleasure or happiness, that is in the long run kind of detrimental. And so just like having a kind of faith, and like knowing from a very inward standpoint, from a very inward like knowing from like a more deeply like autonomous perspective, like the level of selfhood that I can see as being the highest and that can see the most of reality. And which is, you know, really, which is pretty independent. I guess I would say it's like, you know, kind of removed from social influence. It's not like removed from other beings or other people per se. It's just like operating from on a scope of vision that when I have a lot of typical day-to-day interactions with people, those interactions might not be operating from quite that level of vision, and so like just remaining kind of faithful to that, remaining faithful to it in the face of a lot of information or advice that might go to the contrary of it, but that is like kind of that is relevant to a lower realm of, you know, existence. And so this is basically just a very long-winded and complicated way of saying that, like, no, I won't just cheer up. Oh, video stopped for a moment, and I'm not sure what it cut off, but what I was saying was basically that I've gone on a long-winded, complicated way of saying that no, I won't just cheer up, and I won't merely abandon my current perspective by jumping into the type of activity that's conventionally associated with happiness. And while, yes, I recognize the importance of maintaining both, like, physical, emotional, and mental well-being by doing a lot of pretty normal things, or like a lot of things that are widely accepted to contribute to those things, like exercising, meditating, hanging out with friends, eating healthy, etc. I definitely, it's that I definitely can't just relegate the overall direction of my life to an orientation towards a conventional kind of, like, success and happiness and satisfaction. And like this, like, I think this becomes expressed maybe in the videos that I make, and that I can't really bring myself to produce videos that are conventionally valuable. And I may do some things in my life that are conventionally valuable, like, you know, just sometimes I might work a job or a gig or something like that, where I'll do something practical in order to be paid some money. Sure, my life is full of my life is full of the exchange of conventional value. It's unavoidable, of course, and it is necessary, and it forms the basis to be able to engage with reality on post-conventional terms, like terms that are post post-logical, post-rational. And this video while in some ways founded upon rationality, that is, it would everything that I say seems to follow reason. All of that is, you know, like maybe even like somewhat dogmatically so, or like you know, rigorously following reason in everything that I say. And communicating in you know, conventional language. But all of that really is in service of creating a strong foundation to have an experience and share an experience that is post-rational, that transcends reason. And that transcends emotional gratification. And so even if I experience some difficulty, some emotional distress earlier in the video, it doesn't necessarily follow that that I am going to fully indulge in and identify with any emotional reversal that subsequently occurs. Like even if I am to some extent in the first part of the video identified with the emotional and or mental distress, and at the time can't see beyond it, but there's like enough of a shard of awareness above that that can compel me to stick with it and allow myself to continue with the experience, that eventually I become disidentified with that, and then it's and then, like, you know, that distress eventually goes away. It's not really my goal to then just uncritically identify with some positive emotion or positive reframing, positive mental reframing of my experience. Because even if it's positive and pleasant, it's still not operating on the depth of truth that I would like to be operating on. I can point out now some of the other aspects of my experience now that are, even as I predicted earlier, opposite of my earlier experience. Like, I feel unself-conscious. That is, I feel I'm not worrying about what you think of me at all. I'm not worried about any other's judgment, and I feel in a space kind of free of self-judgment at the moment. And in between, and also my thinking feels much clearer now, in that I'm not just trying to pick out the good thoughts amongst a big fast stream of thoughts, but even between saying things, while there might be some thinking, there's not so many extraneous thoughts going on. There's not so many. There's some, but it doesn't feel difficult now to just continue on a train of thought. I don't feel too distracted by other thoughts. And sometimes even between these thoughts, I can experience some awareness without the verbal thoughts. Like if I stop now, and maybe I'll try it intentionally, but we'll see. Just like to direct my attention towards just the immediate sensory input, apart from the thinking mind, and the thinking mind being classifiable as another sense, you could say. There's the senses of sight, sound, touch, and olfactory, that being smell and taste, and then there's the sense of thinking, and just like that the sense of thinking be the one that's like takes a little bit more is a little bit harder to observe without being identified with. But not necessarily so, because it's like when we're always seeing, for instance, it seems to some extent we're somewhat identified with that sense of sight. And we're actively creating this conception of self as the seer, as apart from the seen, and this sensory input is interpreted by our mind as a real outside and separate world that's perceived by the perceiver. And similarly with the other senses. And then if you take a moment to like observe those senses, you can just pick one of them, like sight or something, and then you just observe sight as sight. Then it's possible to just experience this phenomenon of sight as the undifferentiated phenomenon, you know, the undifferentiated aspect of reality that it is, rather than seeing it as being a dividing line between the interior and the exterior. And the same goes with thought. Like, to be able to observe thought as just this process that is happening as part of the world. Rather than being identified with thought and having it become your sense of self, because it's a limited experience of selfhood. And I no longer feel any kind of worry or even any kind of judgment or evaluation regarding the speed of speech now. Because even in the absence of talking, or, you know, the temporary cessation of talking, it feels accurately descriptive of my mental state. It feels honest. And I'm having thoughts that, and I suppose an attitude now that seem to indicate a feeling of autonomy, or an attitude. I'm having an attitude of autonomy, of not feeling immediately concerned about how you might judge this video or how you might judge me, but at the same time, I do feel like just a cognizance of your experience. I mean, or at least an imagined idea of what, of how this video might affect your experience. That is partially informed by responses that previous walking talking videos have received. And my interaction with you, you know, like the whole, like this whole process of why am I doing this? Why am I spending 4 hours walking and talking, or in this case I happen to be sitting and talking for quite a while, and uploading it to YouTube? You know, it's not like, it's definitely not like independent of you. It's most certainly in relation to you. When people say I do things, you know, they just do something for themselves. For me to say that, it would feel to me like a little bit of a falsehood. While it is true that this activity seems to produce in me things like relief, or like, actually hopefully more like transcendence of distressing experiences, or just or unpleasant experiences. It doesn't necessarily relieve them exactly, because maybe, I don't know, maybe it's even producing them at the start, you know, but then they go away, and then I feel like I'm much more aligned with a higher current of being, even though this activity like produces that, it's entirely dependent on my knowledge of communicating with you, and it's entirely dependent on the potential and realized connection with you. Like the connection that is happening now through this video. This, for me, at the present moment, just happens to be a way of relating to people that feels the most aligned with my personal conception of not only morality, but aesthetic beauty and like even notions of like objective like scientific progress or something like that. Like, this is an expression of my highest notion of utility. If it can still be called utility, I'm not sure. But if I had a true and honest conception of utility, then this video would be an expression of it. And I would say, like, that could also be rephrased and just saying like, no, I won't just do something practical and useful. And also, no, I won't just do something entertaining. Because there's no shortage of that already in existence. But Yes, of course. Yes, of course. The practical is necessary and valuable. And what, like this that I'm doing here wouldn't be possible without without the conventional sense of utility and practicality, and it wouldn't be possible without very many people doing a lot of hard work within practical constraints. I guess I'm also working within practical constraints. I guess everyone always is. But that I don't feel any reason to make anything that's there's no reason to create anything that's easier to digest, that's more enticing to your senses or stimulating to your mind. There's no reason for that. And there's not even any reason to do anything that's more conceptually sexy either. You know? Like, this isn't walking and talking is not a great concept. It's just it's just an activity that I do over and over again. It's not, there's nothing clever about it. I seem to be kind of like in an almost bitter tone now, be trying to like deny various forms of value to what I'm doing, which I have to admit has a kind of moralistic motivation behind it. I'm realizing now. There's like it's a kind of moral positioning that I seem to be engaging with, that now that I've noticed myself doing that, I'm like realizing it's unnecessary to like actively like elevate the moral status of what I'm doing here by explaining to you all of the lower forms of morality that it's not indulging in. Because like it's actually, by doing that, I'm actually covertly engaging in like a dualistic type of morality. I'm like covertly identifying lower levels of moral good and then asserting that what I'm doing is operating at a higher level of morality. But in the process of doing that, all I'm really doing is like trying to position myself as an extreme do-gooder. But you know, here I am like calling myself out on that, and even in that, I'm just furthering the same moral positioning. But I guess like what else is there to do, kind of? Like what else is there to do other than try to orient yourself in a to your highest known orientation, you know? It's not that we'll always be operating in accordance with our highest ideals, but we at least have to orient ourselves towards it. And I think that's kind of, I think that's in some sense, it's like everybody is all the time in some way oriented towards growth in the very grand scheme of things. And of course we see instances of people seeming to be stuck or even regressing away from a fuller understanding of reality and type of behavior that's appropriate to that understanding. But like on the whole, it seems like even as society, as moving forward through time, we're generally oriented towards that, even if we get stuck sometimes and even if we regress at times. And on the whole, the more inclusive understandings of reality, the more all-encompassing understandings of reality, meaning that perspectives that the perspectives that can accommodate the most of reality, seems like in general will lead to types of, you know, personal behavior and thinking and types of like societal organization that are just like the most in line with reality as it is, and so we should think should be the most successful. It's not, doesn't, you know, I don't know, what am I saying? That's not an immediate transformation by any means. What am I saying? The camera shut off again. I hope we're not losing any video. It's a tricky thing. Because like from like just really like for me, from my highest perspective of understanding reality, it's like everything belongs. Like everything belongs, including all the other understandings of reality. Like from when I'm operating at my best self, I would say my worldview, within my worldview, all the other worldviews like belong. And so it's not that like from my worldview I don't feel like some kind of like urgency. I don't feel like an urgency to impose my worldview and like spread it, but you could say that my YouTube videos are one form of expressing my worldview. But it feels in line. It feels in line with my values, in the way that putting videos on YouTube doesn't demand anybody's attention or resources. You know, not much resources anyway. There's like a storage space on servers, and then there's the bandwidth, and then the electricity necessary to power devices. But it doesn't. I guess other than the server space, it's not demanding anything from anyone in order, you know. And so this mode of expression feels pretty in line with my values. It's not demanding anything, but it's readily available to a lot of people, and it's like even more available to. It's more available to the most number of people on the earth than most other forms of expression that I can think of. Like even talking to people in person, while on the surface seems as if that's like really accessible or something, it's only accessible to very few. It's completely limited to the number of people that I can talk to in person, and like it demands all those people be in a particular place at a particular time, because our being, it's dependent on our being in the same physical space at the same time. And if I were to try to do that throughout the world, it would demand an incredible amount of resources in the form of jet fuel. And other fuel, and car fuel, or however I'm gonna get around. But comparatively, YouTube is so much more accessible and efficient. And even in the practical considerations of your time, this video is here for you whenever you want it, whenever you have the time for it. You can watch some of it, and you can turn it off and go do something else, and then watch the rest of it later. You can watch however much or however little of walking and talking as you want, and it'll be here as long as YouTube's here. It's interesting that I've now spent a lot of time. I've now spent a lot of time talking about my own mode of expression. And I use that term expression lightly. Because in a more encompassing way to describe this is just like an activity. But it's interesting to me that I've spent so much time now describing certain motivations for the way that I do this activity. Because like in doing that, it's like, where's the substance of the activity if you're just like talking about the activity itself? But I guess that's all this really is anyways. But I guess when you think about it, that's kind of all a lot of things are. If they're not exactly just referent to themselves, then they're referent to the other, you know, very similar modes of expression to such an extent that their meaning and their significance is derived from both their similarity and their difference. From similar modes of expression. And so I feel like walking and talking mostly derives its significance from walking and talking, but that's not entirely true. It's also for me in relation to a really wide variety of other modes of communication and expression and activity in general. It relates to everything for me, or it's in response to everything for me. At every single moment, there's all these decisions to make, like not only what will I say, but how will I navigate in my physical environment. And all these decisions, they don't follow any kind of strict or simple system. But they do follow a very complex system that just is the reality of my that is, well, reality at large. That, you know, every single aspect of my being is part and parcel of reality at large. And it's, but even to say that it is part is not entirely true. Because it's also true to say that this experience is reality itself. And walking and talking if it follows any system is just following that you know, incomprehensibly complex system. But in this process of, you know, just experiencing reality unfolding, awareness of it expands. And within that, we do create some conceptual models via this verbalized thought. But we can also recognize this verbalized thought and the conceptual models that it serves as being, you know, merely one aspect of the, you know, incomprehensibly complex whole. Just to make a break from that, I'm feeling, having some experiences of feeling like deeply confident, and not really in the, not really in a particular sense of anything that I'm saying in particular. Like I don't exactly feel, you know, any uncritical sense of confidence for any particular idea that I've expressed or thing that I've said. On the contrary, I feel, you know, usually some degree of criticism for everything that I say, like starting immediately as I say it, or, you know, either criticism or like a kind of neutrality that maintains itself by continuously moving forward, kind of equilibrium that suspends judgment, whether negative or positive, by just continuing to move forward and allow whatever's problematic about each thought to propel the next thought to correct it, and so on and so forth. So it's not like I don't say that I'm feeling like particularly confident in like the content of what I'm expressing, but feeling feeling some confidence in the value of this process, and an appreciation for myself in being willing to continue with it. And overall, most importantly, a kind of confidence that I am staying aligned with my highest conception of truth, goodness, and beauty. That is like truth and morality and aesthetics. I feel a confidence that I am operating from my own highest conception of those things. And that's not to say that my conception of those things won't change, and that I won't I won't like realize weaknesses to this, or that I won't my conception of those things won't continue to grow. But I guess at this present juncture, but even as I say that, maybe not in the acute sense, like maybe not acutely in this moment, like ahorita, like the little now, but in the general sense of continuing with this process. Walking and talking demands commitment of time in order for anything to be transmitted, well, in order for it to like produce its greatest possible experience, it requires a commitment of time in order to like to create an experience that's the most divergent from what your ordinary experience would be otherwise, I think. But it certainly doesn't demand that you like watch all of it. You don't have to watch a previous episode of Walking and Talking in order to understand the current episode of Walking and Talking. And I'm not exactly sure how important it is to watch like an entire episode in chronological order, but I am sure that that is you know, most conducive to that would be most conducive to producing and experiencing an experience in you that would be most similar to my experience here. But it might also be possible that some of that is possible while watching just a fragment. But like, for instance, well, I'm not sure. You know, for instance, if you watched like the first hour of this video, in which I mostly had negative judgments of what I was doing and was experiencing slowness and fogginess of thought, it wouldn't seem like the video, and then you stopped it out after that without seeing any of the subsequent reversal of those experiences. It wouldn't seem like the video had contributed anything desirable to your experience. But I also wonder that if that experience wouldn't have primed your consciousness for that same type of reversal, like just later on, like after you've stopped the video. You know, you watch something, if you do something really boring for long enough, then just any variance in that becomes really exciting. You do something, you know, you go to work and do something boring enough, like you get home and get to do whatever you want, it's kind of exciting, or it's relatively exciting, you know? So I kind of wonder, well, I wonder yeah, I really wonder if like if you know, through like empathetic response to a person that you see on video, which, you know, happens all the time. If I'm feeling kind of lethargic, maybe that produces that same response in you. So I guess the question is, if you stop the video in that lethargic state, does that lethargy continue in your existence, affecting you negatively, or does it prime you for the reversal of like then noticing, then feeling an energy, greater energy, as like a rebound from that? I generally have this sense that doing the most boring things is like, I don't know, maybe that's not true. I was gonna say doing, you know, as the most boring things possible, it's like really good for you. But it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to do that, because like the boringness is not inherent to any particular activity or object or piece of entertainment or media. The boringness is your experience in relation to it. And our experience is never static and stable. If we have a stimuli that is static and stable, like an activity that persists for a certain period of time, we'll definitely notice our experience in relation to it change greatly. Something's fun at first, then it becomes boring, and then it'll be really boring, then it'll be extremely boring, then it might get really interesting in a new way after you get through that intense boredom. That's why I think these walking and talking videos are kind of a challenge. We're almost at the point where we can turn back. Well, we are at the point where we can turn back. You know, we're like we're in the last fourth of the video, which is amazing. Time has really flown by here in my experience. But now it's time to pick some stinging nettles. And I really apologize that this maybe is kind of a compromise to do something of a practical nature while walking and talking. I mean, well, it's practical in the in the bodily sense, but I think, as we've talked about, that kind of practicality exists within the scope of this more transcendent this transcendent mode of operation. And so it's, from that perspective, it's perfectly in line with what we're trying to accomplish here. And in my views, very consistent with, well, maintaining the foundation for this post-rational thought. You know, stinging nettles being so incredibly nutrient dense food. They're supposedly good for alleviating allergies, which is good for me. They don't cost any money, which means I save some money. That really means is I save time that can be further devoted towards walking and talking. And there's this experience of picking them, which in our context of modernity is an experience that's out of the ordinary and is in such enlivening to the senses in a non-addictive manner. And that's an incredibly valuable thing. And also the experience of preparing and consuming them, to me, is also further enlivening to the senses in a somewhat non-addictive manner. But what I usually do is make them in a pesto, and it is really delicious. And so pesto is maybe a little bit addictive for me, but I feel free of guilt when I do it, knowing that I'm just eating so many greens that I didn't have to, you know, throw away any packaging for. And I guess to answer maybe some of your burning question is, yes, they sting a little bit when I pick them on my fingers, and then once I cook them at all, or even once I just blend them up with the olive oil and stuff to make pesto, they don't sting you anymore, and of course you can eat them without getting stung. And they taste like, I don't know, like a green vegetable. And you know, why not throw in some garlic mustard leaves while we're at it, for good measure, and to contribute some of that garlicky pungentness to our pesto. You know, and get, you know, this very, another nutrient dense plant, a member of the Brassica family, so you get all those antioxidants associated with broccoli and kale and so on. And then, like, you know, if you want to also indulge in the satisfaction of operating in a socially conventional morality, then you're on the up and up, because garlic mustard is considered an invasive plant. And so there's no, you can pretend like you're helping the ecosystem or something when you pick it. Nettle's not an invasive, but when you just pick the tops of it, it doesn't kill the plant. And if you go in like a dense patch and you just kind of like thin it out where it's really dense, then it can actually be beneficial towards the patch, or so I'm told. You know, it's like that's engaging in the kind of like more I don't know. That's like a kind of practicality that when you're doing it, you get some alleviation of the like intense questioning of meaning of everything that you're doing, because there's just this more immediate reason for doing this. And that it'll keep you from, it'll, you know, get rid of your hunger, and also be healthy for you. So then you get some relief from this, like, of like having to find the meaning in what seems like a vacuum. But like, am I doing what I said I wouldn't do, in that am I indulging in a lower form of meaning and thus like weakening my connection to a higher form of meaning? Ow. Ow. No, I don't think so. And then watch out for the poison ivy. That one and that one. And you just want to touch the stems very gingerly. Ow, ow. That was my shin that brushed up against, because whenever you like brush up against it, then it stings. But if I just kind of like pinch the stem, then it only stings me a little bit on the pads of my fingers. Or you can wear gloves. I'm doing this a lot slower because while I'm doing this, I'm also trying to walk and talk. That is, remain connected to a post-rational existence. More poison ivy. Ow. Ow. Really trying not to brush up against the poison ivy. Ow. And trying to stop, brushing the outside of my hand against the nettles, because that's when it hurts more. Ow. And then, when I blend this up and make pesto, it's just so easy then to just eat like a ton of greens and a ton of nettles. Now here's walking, talking, devolving into some kind of like health show, health diet show. But you know, we're not like missing anything by doing this. We're not like, well, sure, I guess we're, you know, we're always missing the potential for everything else that could possibly be all the time. Anytime we experience one thing, we're missing out on all the other possible experiences that we could be having. But there's no need really to speculate about the potential better quality of experience that we could have if we weren't picking nettles. You know, maybe I could be focused more on just talking and not paying attention to the like outward world. But you know, I think we've already established pretty clearly that the fallacy of that kind of thinking. Oh, you know what? It was maybe like a very nitpicky type of thing to think about is maybe I won't pick the ones that are growing next to this electric pole, because those things are usually treated with creosote, and that seeps into the ground, and there's something bad in it, I think, that the plants can absorb. Not a huge deal, but might as well pick the ones that aren't next to it. This will be the first nettle pesto of the season for me, and I'm really looking forward to it. If I'm really a good guy, maybe I'll post some pictures of making the pesto in the community section later. I'm not making any promises though. Ow. Ow. That's just my ankle rubbing against a nettle. Ow. If I maintain the motivation to take pictures while I'm making the pesto, then I'll put it in the community tab. But all you have to know is you just make it the same way that you would make basil pesto. You just, you know, find any recipe for basil pesto, and then just use nettles instead, or use partially nettles and partially basil, or use garlic mustard or chickweed. Maybe put a little extra garlic in there, since if you want to not use dairy, you can use nutritional yeast instead of cheese, which I like to do. I'm not vegan, but I don't like to eat a lot of dairy. Now I'm talking about my life, and that's interesting. I almost never do anything like that. But for some reason, at this moment, it seems acceptable to relate to you in that manner. Maybe that means I'm getting lax. Ow! but I still feel I guess content enough that that belongs in this video. Is that some kind of, maybe this is some kind of like reward, you could say. Hey, somebody else picked those nettles. See? Or somebody ate them. Like I don't know if deers can eat nettles. I don't know if they can do that. They're so stingy. Maybe this is like some kind of like mild indulgence of indulgence in the meaning of the more conventionally practical realm of existence that I've maybe gravitated towards after spending a period resisting that. And so maybe it occurs as a slight reward for you as well as a viewer. Like a slight respite in the world of relating to a person as a person with a personality and identity and traits and habits and such. I've lost track a little bit of the time. Like I remember roughly when I started, when I looked at the clock, but not exactly, and the video stopped a couple of times, maybe for not longer than a couple of minutes, I'm sure. But I know that we're getting towards the end. I'm just gonna keep picking nettles here. And some garlic mustard as well. It's pretty, I know it's like, I know I'm kind of like, I definitely could be perceived as like emotionally cold, I think. Or, like maybe this, like I think this video could be perceived as kind of cold or something. And I'm not sure, like maybe like my tone of voice or something is maybe so far in this video has been kind of like a kind of formal and maybe kind of just slightly emotionless and analytical. It's, you know, so analytical of my emotions, but with like such a distance from my emotions. I won't necessarily make a judgment of that now. I mean, like I was talking so much about kind of resisting any kind of emotional like gratification, like I was talking about, and like right now I'm kind of wondering, like now, like that the importance of that resistance is coming into question. Like is it somehow problematic if I start to take on a more personable and friendly persona, not just persona, but just like attitude, or countenance? And I guess in this moment I can't see any problem with that. And I can't see any problem with just with picking nettles and talking about picking nettles. Or even with talking about practical things like how to make nettle pesto. Oh, by the way, sometimes I steam the nettles before I blend it up in the pesto. You just steam it like a little bit, because that totally gets rid of the sting before you blend it. And so if you want to do it the kind of like safer way, you can do that. But I've also found that I've just done it raw in the blender, and as long as it gets like blended up very thoroughly, and I also put like a little bit of salt. I put like lots of olive oil, a lot of garlic, some nuts. You can use most kinds of nuts, work fine. I like walnuts and almonds. Pine nuts are really good, but they're really expensive, so I usually don't do that. Nutritional yeast and a little bit of salt, and sometimes a little lemon juice is really nice in there. Maybe a little bit of black pepper, but that's totally optional. And then just blend it up really well. But yeah, you can do it raw. I can put it in raw too, and I haven't been stung by that, as long as it gets blended up thoroughly. But if you want to be extra safe, because you don't necessarily trust eating this plant that stings you, you can just steam it first, and then you'll see that there's no more sting after that. Ow. I guess it's that sometimes I feel a strong need to assert my own autonomy from being pressured to maintain a chipper appearance, and like a superficially positive outlook on things. But I guess so long as I have asserted that autonomy, then there's no problem really with like being a bit more relaxed in some way right now. And I genuinely feel like goodwill towards you in this moment, as in like you know, from this experience of feeling like really like pretty relatively like unagitated, from that experience I have a desire for you to also experience that, but at the same time, I might have said the same thing like last episode, but on the same token, I just want to assure you that if you're not feeling the same way that I'm feeling, and you're feeling difficult emotions and agitation, that then I just want to reassure you that they will pass, and that like even to the extent that you don't like seek to immediately run away from them and avoid them, or like immediately like change your experience, and you like allow yourself to kind of sit with those that unpleasant feelings, like it may have a positive impact on you in the long run, and you may grow in a way that helps you to experience less and less unpleasantness in the future. And so that's kind of my way of saying, like, it's kind of my way of like reassuring you that you don't really need my reassurance. And also that you don't really need my thinking either. You don't need this video. You don't need to like be like me. Unless you want to. You probably want to pick more nettles than you think you need, because they'll really reduce a lot in volume when you cook them and when you blend them. You can really like pack a lot of leaves into one batch of pesto. There's some medium small turtles. Sometimes I wonder, like, if I'm even talking enough, like, or I wonder, like, in the moments when I'm not talking, like, I might be feeling something and thinking something, and maybe just like thinking that you might be feeling or thinking the same thing or something similar, but I don't ever really know how much is expressed or how much is transmitted by these videos. It might be impossible to really know, but when people leave comments, sometimes those comments seem to indicate that they understood something that I was thinking or feeling, or that what was transmitted to them was also true to what I was experiencing, and that is that produces a good feeling for me. That's emotionally gratifying for me. So maybe you shouldn't do it. Well, it depends on how much emotional gratification you want to provide me with. I don't have to read the comments.